My name is Vera, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would be starting over again. After 40 years in the same house, the place where my late husband Frank and I built our lives, I found myself packing my belongings because my daughter-in-law thought I was just a useless old woman. When she demanded I move to a nursing home, I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I left and sold the house right from under them. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when someone took your kindness for weakness. I still remember the day Frank and I bought our colonial-style house in a quiet suburb of Milwaukee. It was 1984, and we were so proud to call it our own. The two-story white house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch was everything we had dreamed of. We spent weekends fixing it up, planting a garden in the backyard, and making it our home. A year later, our son Thomas was born, and our family was complete. Frank and I raised Thomas in that house. Every door frame had pencil marks tracking his growth. The living room saw Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. The kitchen was where I taught Thomas to bake his first cookies. Our home was filled with love and laughter, and we made countless memories there. 3 years ago, Frank passed away from heart disease. It was sudden, and the pain of losing him nearly broke me. After 40 years of marriage, learning to live alone was the hardest thing I had ever done. I kept myself busy with my volunteer work at the hospital, where I had worked as a nurse before retirement. I maintained an active social life with my friends, especially my best friend Martha, who had lost her husband a few years before me. 2 years after Frank's passing, Thomas and his wife Heather were struggling financially. Heather had been laid off from her marketing job, and they were finding it difficult to pay rent for their apartment. I suggested they move in with me. The house was too big for just me anyway, and I thought having family around would help fill the emptiness Frank had left behind. At first, our arrangement worked wonderfully. Thomas took over the yard work that had become difficult for me and Heather, eventually found a new position at a marketing firm. We shared meals together most evenings, and I enjoyed having company again. I kept my independence, still driving myself to my volunteer shifts at the hospital and meeting friends for lunch or book club meetings. Financially, I was comfortable. The house was paid off, and between my pension, Social Security, and the life insurance Frank had left me, I had enough to live on without worry. I never asked Thomas and Heather for rent, thinking of it as my way of helping them save for their future. Thomas had always been a good son. Growing up, he was sensitive and thoughtful, much like his father. After moving back home, though, I noticed he seemed distracted, sometimes deferring to Heather more and more in conversations. Still, he would always give me a kiss on the cheek when he came home from work and ask about my day. Heather was always polite, but somewhat distant. She was ambitious and focused on her career as a marketing executive. I admired her drive, but sometimes wished we could connect more personally. She had sleek blonde hair that she kept in a perfect bob designer clothes, and a way of making even casual remarks sound like business proposals. Looking back, there were small signs of tension I chose to ignore. Heather would make comments about the house being so retro or suggest that my routines were old-fashioned. I would laugh these off, thinking she was just from a different generation. I wanted so badly for us to be a family that I overlooked the warning signs. Everything changed when Thomas and Heather announced they were expecting a baby. We were having dinner together on a Sunday evening, a tradition I had maintained from when Thomas was growing up. Heather placed her water glass down carefully and looked at Thomas with a smile before turning to me. "Vera, we have some exciting news," she said, reaching for Thomas's hand. "We're going to have a baby. You're going to be a grandmother." My heart swelled with joy. After losing Frank, this felt like a new chapter of happiness opening up in our family. I jumped up to hug them both, tears in my eyes. "This is wonderful news," I exclaimed. "Frank would have been so proud to be a grandfather." Thomas hugged me tight. "We're really happy, Mom." Later that evening, as we were having coffee in the living room, Heather and Thomas exchanged a look before Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, we were thinking about the baby's room," he began. "We think your craft room would make the perfect nursery. It gets the morning sun and it's right next to our bedroom." My craft room was my sanctuary. After retiring, I had taken up quilting and scrapbooking, preserving family memories, and creating gifts for friends. It was also where I kept many of Frank's things that I wasn't ready to part with yet. "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "I hadn't thought about that. When would you need it by?" "We should probably start converting it soon," Heather said, her voice brisk and matter-of-fact. "I'm already in my second trimester, and these things take time to organize properly." I nodded, pushing down the hurt I felt at not being consulted earlier. "Of course, it makes sense for the baby to be close to you. I can move my things to the small guest room." Over the next week, I packed up my crafting supplies and Frank's belongings, moving them to the much smaller room at the end of the hall. Thomas helped carry the heavier boxes, but Heather was already measuring the craft room for new furniture and paint colors. As Heather's pregnancy progressed, I began to notice a shift in how she treated me. What started as subtle comments became more frequent and less disguised. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I overheard Heather on the phone in the living room. "It's challenging enough preparing for a baby without having to consider an old lady's feelings at every turn," she was saying to someone, her voice low, but clear enough for me to hear. "I feel like I'm living in a museum sometimes, with all her old things around." I pretended not to hear when she came into the kitchen, but something inside me wilted. Still, I made excuses for her. Pregnancy was stressful, and hormones could make anyone irritable. Thomas became more distant too, taking Heather's side in small disagreements about household matters. When I suggested we keep the family dining table that had been in our house for decades, Thomas shook his head. "Heather wants something more modern, Mom. Times change." I tried harder to be helpful without being intrusive. I offered to cook meals, thinking it would ease Heather's burden, but that backfired too. "Vera, I appreciate the effort, but these old recipes are too heavy on salt and fat," Heather said one evening, barely touching the pot roast I had made. "It's not healthy for the baby. I need to follow my nutritionist's meal plan. I nodded, fighting back tears as I cleared away the barely touched food. The pot roast was Thomas's favorite growing up, and Frank had always asked for seconds. Now, it was deemed unhealthy and outdated just like me. As Heather's pregnancy advanced into the third trimester, the subtle pushing became more obvious. One day, I came home from grocery shopping to find several decorating magazines spread across the coffee table. They were open to pages, advertising luxury retirement communities and nursing homes. "Just doing some research," Heather said lightly when she saw me looking at them. "For the future." At a small dinner party they hosted for Heather's work colleagues, I became painfully aware of how I was being portrayed. Heather introduced me as Thomas's mother who's staying with us for now. Not the homeowner, not even a permanent resident. When I offered to refill drinks, Heather laughed and said to her friends, "Vera's from that generation that thinks women should always be serving others. So traditional." Her friends smiled politely, and I retreated to the kitchen, feeling like an outdated relic. Thomas's defenses of me became weaker and less frequent. When I mentioned how hurt I felt by some of Heather's comments, he sighed. "Mom, she doesn't mean anything by it. She's just stressed about the baby and work. Try not to take everything so personally." Meanwhile, Heather began redecorating the common areas of the house without consulting me. The floral curtains Frank and I had chosen years ago were replaced with modern blinds. The comfortable old couch where we had spent countless evenings was swapped for a sleek sectional that hurt my back. Most painfully family photos began to disappear. The gallery wall along the staircase that had chronicled our family history was taken down one day while I was at my volunteer shift. When I asked about it, Heather explained that they were refreshing the space and would put some of the photos back later. They never did. Instead, abstract art and professional photographs of Heather and Thomas took their place. It was as if Frank's and my history in the house was being systematically erased. One Saturday, Heather had some of her friends over for a baby shower planning session. I offered to make coffee and brought out a plate of cookies. As I entered the living room, one of Heather's friends was saying, "And you're still living with his mother. I couldn't handle that." They fell silent when they saw me. I set down the cookies and left quickly, but the damage was done. I felt invisible in my own home, an inconvenience to be managed. The worst incident came when I returned from book club to find Heather rearranging the curio cabinet in the dining room. A small crystal bird that Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary lay broken on the floor. "Oh, sorry about that," Heather said, not looking particularly concerned. "It was an accident. These old things are so fragile." I gathered the pieces with trembling hands, retreating to my bedroom to cry quietly. It wasn't just glass that was broken. It was another connection to Frank, another memory being carelessly swept aside. That evening, I called my best friend Martha, finally voicing my concerns. "They're pushing me out, Martha," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Bit by bit, they're making me feel unwelcome in my own home." Martha's response was direct. "Vera, honey, they're not just pushing you out. They're erasing you. You need to stand up for yourself before you have nothing left. I defended Thomas, saying he would never want me to leave. He's my son. He loves me. I'm sure he does, Martha replied gently. But he's letting this happen, and that's almost as bad. I tried to talk to Thomas the next day, catching him alone in the kitchen early one morning before he left for work. Thomas, I feel like things are changing very quickly in the house, I began cautiously. I understand you and Heather want to make it your own, but I feel like my thoughts and feelings aren't being considered. Thomas sighed, not quite meeting my eyes. Mom, you're being sensitive. Heather just has a different style, and with the baby coming, we need to make some changes. It's natural. But removing all the family photos, breaking Frank's gift to me, that doesn't feel natural, Thomas. The photos were outdated and accidents happen, he replied, gathering his keys. Heather's under a lot of pressure right now. Can we talk about this another time? I'm late for work. He left before I could respond, and our conversation was never revisited. I found myself spending more and more time in my bedroom, the only space that still felt like mine. Even my garden, where I had always found peace, was being updated with Heather's preferred plants and design. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, and the worst part was that no one seemed to notice or care. The day everything changed was unusually warm for October in Wisconsin. I had gone to my hospital volunteer shift in the morning, but developed a migraine by early afternoon. The bright lights and constant noise of the hospital made it worse, so I decided to go home early, something I rarely did. I parked in the driveway instead of the garage, not wanting the noise of the automatic door to announce my arrival. If Thomas and Heather were home. My head was pounding, and all I wanted was to lie down in a dark, quiet room with a cold compress. As I quietly entered through the side door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Thomas and Heather were home, probably on their lunch break. I was about to call out when Heather's words froze me in place. I don't want a useless old woman in here with a baby coming, she was saying, her voice clear and hard. You should find a nursing home for her, Thomas. She's only going to become more of a burden, and I can't handle a newborn and an elderly dependent at the same time. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The words hit me like physical blows, each one cutting deeper than the last. Useless. Old. Burden. The cruel dismissal of my entire existence reduced to inconvenient caretaking. Thomas's response was even more heartbreaking for what it lacked. Heather, I can't just ship my mother off to a home, he said, his voice weak and unconvincing. Maybe we could wait until after the baby comes, see how things go. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't outraged on my behalf. He was negotiating a timeline for my disposal. No, Heather insisted firmly. She needs to be dealt with before the baby arrives. I'm not bringing our child home to a house with a geriatric roommate. It's not fair to any of us, including her. She'd be better off with professional care. I stood frozen in the hallway, my migraine forgotten, as a different kind of pain overwhelmed me. My heart raced and I felt dizzy, gripping the wall for support. Somehow, I managed to retreat silently to the side door, slipping out as quietly as I had come in. Sitting in my car, I broke down completely, great heaving sobs, that I muffled against my sleeve. How had it come to this? When had my son, whom I had loved and nurtured and supported his entire life, become someone who would discuss discarding me as if I were an outdated appliance? I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up at a park Frank and I used to visit. Sitting on a bench overlooking the pond, I watched the late afternoon sun sparkle on the water, feeling utterly lost and betrayed. When I finally returned home that evening, I went straight to my room, claiming my migraine had worsened. I couldn't bear to look at either of them, afraid my face would reveal what I had overheard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, looking through old photo albums by the dim light of my bedside lamp. Pictures of Thomas as a baby, as a toddler, taking his first steps as a teenager at his high school graduation with Frank and me on either side of him, beaming with pride. "What would you do, Frank?" I whispered to his smiling image. For a moment, I thought I could hear his voice in my head. "You stand up for yourself, Vera. You always were stronger than you knew." The next morning, I waited until Heather had left for work before approaching Thomas in the kitchen. My sleepless night had brought clarity, if not peace. "Thomas," I said calmly, "do you and Heather want me to leave this house?" He looked up from his coffee startled. "What? Why would you ask that, Mom?" "It's a simple question." I continued, keeping my voice steady. "Do you want me to find somewhere else to live?" Thomas's eyes shifted away from mine. "We were going to have a discussion about some options for the future," he began awkwardly. "With the baby coming, space is going to be tight, and we thought maybe a place with more support services might be better for you." Before he could continue, Heather walked back into the kitchen, having forgotten her phone. She caught the tail end of Thomas's words and jumped in. "Vera, we're only thinking of what's best for everyone," she said, her professional smile firmly in place. "A retirement community would give you friends your own age and activities tailored to your abilities." "My abilities?" I repeated softly. "Yes," Heather continued, seemingly encouraged. "And, to be honest, a newborn's cries and irregular schedule would be very disruptive for someone your age. You wouldn't be able to handle it." And there it was, the final confirmation of what I had heard the day before. I was considered incapable, a burden, someone to be managed rather than loved and respected. In their eyes, I had an expiration date that had long since passed. I nodded slowly. "I see. Thank you for being honest." Thomas looked uncomfortable, but he didn't contradict his wife. In his silence, I heard everything I needed to know about where I stood. That night was another sleepless one, but instead of grief, a quiet determination grew within me. As the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I waited until Thomas and Heather had left for work before calling my friend Judith, who had been a family attorney before retiring. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, well away from any of Heather's usual haunts. "Judith, I need to know something," I said after we had exchanged greetings. "The house I live in, the one Frank and I bought together, is it legally mine?" Judith looked surprised. "Of course it is, Vera. Frank left everything to you in his will. The house is solely in your name, unless you've added Thomas to the deed. I haven't, I confirmed. I was planning to leave it to him eventually, but we never got around to making those arrangements. Then yes, it's completely yours, Judith said. You can do whatever you want with it. Why do you ask? I explained the situation, my voice breaking only once as I recounted overhearing Heather's cruel words. Judith's expression darkened as she listened. Vera, I'm so sorry, she said when I finished. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not by family. What are my options? I asked. Well, legally speaking, you could ask them to move out since they don't have any ownership claim. Or, she hesitated, then continued, you could sell the house if you wanted to make a clean break. The idea took root immediately. A clean break, a fresh start. I thanked Judith and drove straight to Martha's house. My best friend listened to my plan without interruption, then nodded firmly. My guest house is yours for as long as you need it, she said. And I think you're making the right decision. The next day, while Thomas and Heather were at work, I packed essential belongings, family heirlooms, and personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Martha helped me load everything into her car and my own. By mid-afternoon, I had moved into her charming guest house, a small but beautiful space with a garden view. I left only a brief note on the kitchen counter. I've found other accommodations as you requested. I'll be in touch about the house. The call started that evening. First Thomas, then Heather, then Thomas again. I let them go to voicemail, not ready to speak with either of them yet. Thomas's messages grew increasingly panicked. Mom, where are you? What do you mean, as requested? Please call me back. Heather's were more controlled, but had an edge of concern. Vera, we're worried about you. Whatever you think you heard or understood, we should talk about it in person. Please let us know you're safe. I texted Thomas only, I'm safe and staying with a friend. I need some time. Meanwhile, I contacted a real estate agent recommended by Judith. Samantha was efficient and discreet, immediately understanding my situation. The market is very strong right now, she told me after viewing the house. Your property could sell quickly, especially in that neighborhood. I also met with my financial advisor, ensuring that selling the house and purchasing a new place would leave me secure for the rest of my life. With each step I took, I felt more empowered, more in control of my own destiny. After a week of silence, Thomas finally tracked me down at Martha's. I was in the garden when his car pulled into the driveway. Martha gave me a supportive nod from her kitchen window as Thomas approached, looking haggard and confused. Mom, he began, what's going on? Why did you leave like that? I gestured for him to sit on the garden bench beside me. Thomas, I overheard your conversation with Heather last week about finding a nursing home for your useless mother. His face drained of color. You heard that, Mom. I didn't mean. Heather was just stressed. Stop, I said gently. Let's not pretend anymore. It's clear that Heather doesn't want me in the house, and you weren't willing to stand up for me. So I'm respecting your wishes for privacy with your new family. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. But where will you live? The house is your home. I'm making other arrangements, I said simply. What does that mean? he asked, a note of panic entering his voice. It means I'm taking control of my life, Thomas. Something I should have done sooner. He left soon after, no closer to understanding what I was planning, but at least knowing I was safe and well. Heather called that evening, her voice honeyed with conciliation. Vera, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Whatever you thought you heard, we would never want you to feel unwelcome in your own home. Thank you, Heather, I replied calmly. But I think we all know that's not true. Over the next 2 weeks, Samantha showed the house while Thomas and Heather were at work. Because I had maintained it beautifully over the years, and the location was desirable, we received multiple offers quickly. I accepted one that was above asking price from a young family with 2 small children. The father was a doctor, the mother a teacher. I liked the thought of children filling the house with laughter again. I signed the papers in Judith's presence, making everything official and legal. Only then did I have my attorney send formal notice to Thomas and Heather as tenants that the property had been sold, and they would need to vacate by the end of the month. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Thomas called me, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. You sold our house without even telling us. Where are we supposed to go with a baby on the way? It's not our house, Thomas, I corrected him gently. It was my house which I allowed you to live in, rent-free out of love. The new owners will need you to be out by the 30th. Later that same day, both Thomas and Heather showed up at Martha's door. Martha let them in, but stayed close by, protective as always. Heather's pregnancy was now very visible, her belly protruding beneath her designer maternity dress. Her face was tear-streaked, a stark contrast to her usual composed appearance. How could you do this to us? She demanded, her voice breaking. We're about to have a baby, and you've made us homeless out of spite? I remained calm, hands folded in my lap. I've simply made different living arrangements as you wanted. You said I was useless and should be in a nursing home. I decided I didn't want to be where I wasn't wanted. That was a private conversation, Heather protested. In my house, I reminded her. Thomas stepped forward, his face a mask of hurt and anger. How could you do this to your own son, to your grandchild? The question struck at my heart, but I held firm. How could you sit quietly while your wife called me useless and planned to put me in a home? How could you value me so little after everything we've been through together? I was trying to keep peace, Thomas said weakly. I never would have actually made you leave. But you wouldn't stand up for me either, I pointed out. And that told me everything I needed to know about my place in your life. Heather shifted tactics, suddenly all contrition. Vera, I was emotional because of the pregnancy. I didn't mean those things I said. We can work this out. Please call the buyers and tell them you've changed your mind. It's too late for that, I said. The papers are signed. The house is sold. We can't find a place that quickly, Heather cried. No one will rent to us with my maternity leave coming up. We need more time. That's not my concern anymore, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. The new landlord told them they need to move out by the end of the month. Thomas stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I never thought you could be so cold. And I never thought you could be so weak, I responded sadly. We've both learned something about each other, it seems. They left soon after, Heather sobbing dramatically. Thomas silent and stunned. It hurt to see them go like that. But beneath the pain was a growing sense of justice and self-respect that had been missing from my life for too long. With the proceeds from the house sale, I purchased a lovely 2-bedroom condo in a building designed for active seniors. It was close to Martha and my other friends, with a community garden, a small library, and weekly social activities. My new home was smaller, but filled with only things that brought me joy and comfort. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace in my surroundings. The first months were difficult emotionally. Despite everything, Thomas was still my son, and separation from him left a hole in my heart. I missed the daily interactions, the small moments of connection that had sustained me even through the tension with Heather. Thomas and Heather found a small apartment across town. It wasn't what they had planned, and I knew they blamed me for their reduced circumstances. Part of me felt guilty, but a stronger part knew I had done what was necessary for my own well-being and dignity. 3 months after I moved into my condo, Heather gave birth to a baby boy they named James. The delivery was complicated, and both Heather and the baby had to stay in the hospital longer than expected. Thomas called me sounding exhausted and overwhelmed. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know what to do. Heather's struggling and the baby won't stop crying and the apartment is a mess." Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son, and he needed me. "I'll be right there," I said without hesitation. When I arrived at their small apartment, I found Thomas trying to soothe a screaming James while surrounded by unwashed dishes, laundry, and takeout containers. The look of relief on his face when he saw me nearly broke my heart. Over the next few weeks, I helped them adjust to parenthood, showing Thomas how to comfort the baby, preparing meals, and keeping the apartment in order. Heather, diagnosed with postpartum depression, was initially resistant to my presence, but gradually accepted the help as she recovered. During this time, Thomas and I had several long, painful, but necessary conversations about what had happened. "I failed you, Mom," he admitted one evening as we sat together while James slept. "I should have stood up to Heather, told her that her behavior was unacceptable. I was trying to please everyone and ended up hurting the person who has always been there for me." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "And that hurt more than anything Heather said." "I'm so sorry," he said, tears in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I understand what I did wrong. And I'm trying to be a better person, a better father to James than I was a son to you at the end." It wasn't an instant reconciliation, but it was a start. I made it clear that while I would always love him and be there for my grandson, our relationship would need to be rebuilt on my terms, with proper boundaries and mutual respect. Heather was a harder case. As she recovered from her depression, she remained formal with me, never quite acknowledging how deeply she had hurt me. But watching her struggle with the realities of motherhood, I saw a vulnerability in her that helped me understand, if not excuse, some of her behavior. "Parenthood humbles you," I told her one day as she tearfully tried to soothe a colicky James. "It shows you that you're not always in control, that life is messy and unpredictable. No amount of planning can change that. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. I'm beginning to understand that, she admitted. I thought I could manage everything perfectly, including you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. It wasn't a full apology for all she had said and done, but it was something. A recognition, at least, that I was a person with feelings and dignity, not a problem to be managed. As James grew, I found immense joy in being a grandmother. I visited regularly, but always returned to my own space afterward, maintaining the independence that had become so precious to me. Thomas made efforts to rebuild our relationship, calling often and bringing James to visit me at my condo. Looking back now, a year after selling the house, I realize that standing up for myself was the best thing I could have done, not just for me, but for all of us. Thomas became more thoughtful and considerate, no longer taking me for granted. Heather learned that there are consequences to treating people as disposable. And I discovered a strength in myself that I never knew I had. The peace I've found isn't just in my new surroundings, but in knowing my own worth and refusing to accept anything less than respect from others, even those I love most. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with family, but they're often the most necessary. If there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes the greatest love we can show is to ourselves by refusing to stay where we're not valued. It doesn't mean we stop loving others. It means we include ourselves in that circle of care and compassion. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If my experience resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult times. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve respect at every age and stage of your life.